Minor piece ending in something, it's something we see very frequently in regular tournament games. So there are several ways, several types of minor piece endings. When we say minor piece endings, we're talking about one minor piece each side. So it can be knight versus knight or bishop versus knight. So every end game in chess today has some basics. So the basic principle of minor piece endings are such. For example, we have king and pawn with knight each. Well, here is the regular position where each side has king, pawn, and knight. Well, who is better here? And the rule says very simple. Most of the rules that we apply in pawn endings, they are suitable for knight endings too. We'll see, for example, if we say in pawn end game, it's very important to have outside pass pawn. We already went through it because outside pass pawn gives you big advantage. So we have in this position an outside pass pawn. Now, this is the criteria which tells you that white definitely has an advantage. Now, but only difference is, it's the same principle as in pawn ending, but the difference is only the size of this advantage. Well, if we took the knights off, for example, the outside pass pawn, we have something like this. This is easily won for white. White is winning here. In a knight ending, it's not always so. White has clear advantage with good chances to win. So if we say that pawn end game is always either won for one side or the other side, or it's a drawn, it's always result can be determined based on the position. It's not always so in any of the minor piece end games. So the criteria of assessing position, we can assess, well, white is much better, and you do the same thing. You try to queen the pawn, which obviously is going to be stopped, and then you try to march the king to attack this knight, to dislodge the knight, and if black king follows you, you try to sneak on the other side to the other pawns, which is the same goes for the pawn end game. White is much better. It's not clear that white is winning. So that's how you assess this position. And also, for double pawns are not good in pawn end game, so they are not good in the knight end game. Protected pass pawn, here is the example of it, is very good in the pawn endings, almost always winning. And same goes for the knight end game. You do the same principle. So every rule that does apply in a pawn end game applies also in the knight and pawn endings. Now, the different thing is when we have bishop ending. Bishop end games, again, there are some rules from pawn endings. For example, we have same color bishops, and if we have an outside pass pawn, here is the example on an outside pass pawn. H pawn versus F pawn. That's a big advantage, but that's only one similar rule. There are other rules in bishop ending that are very, very critical and very crucial. We are talking, when I say bishop endings, notice that I'm talking about same color bishops, not opposite color bishops. Same color bishops. Well, opposite color bishops is a completely different issue, which we're going to discuss briefly later on this lecture. So, for example, pawns are fixed, frozen. This is big liability for black. Pawn on g5, because it's a weak pawn. White can attack the pawn, and black needs whole bishop to protect it. That's a big liability. White cannot win this, but this is one little advantage that is not enough to win the game. However, if we got another pawn like this, now black has two weaknesses. Now you may say black is protecting both weaknesses again, and maybe it is a draw. Well, it's not always like this. The way white can play, well, in this position, it's very difficult to win because black has two squares. For example, it's white's move. Obviously, if it's black's move, black can simply resign here because next move they're going to lose a pawn. If bishop moves, white takes one of the g5 or c5 pawns, and if king moves, then white just penetrates with the king and wins one of the pawns, whichever way they're going to penetrate. But white should try to get the same position with the black to move. That's kind of difficult to do. Now, bishop d2, now black has to hold the g5 pawn. Black goes bishop f6. Now white goes bishop c1. Remember, if black goes bishop e7, they lose after bishop e3, because now it's black's move, the same position. But black goes on bishop c1, black goes bishop d8. So black should stay away from the e7 square. Black bishop should go to e7 square only after white plays bishop to e3. So black has enough to hold this position. But now let's try to move position one square down. We move all the pieces one square down. Now this is totally lost for black. White makes any move. Black has only one square because they have to keep an eye on g6 pawn, bishop f7. Now white goes bishop c2. Black only has bishop e8 square, and now bishop e4. White easily achieves the starting position with black to move, and now black is on the move, and they have no move. On king d7, king f6, king f7, king d6, and bishop cannot move because white takes one of the pawns. So this position is lost. So what are the rules? Try to keep your pawns in a bishop ending. Try to keep your pawns on the color opposite of your bishop color. For example, well, when I said if you have dark square bishop, try to keep your pawns on light squares. This is dark square bishop. Try to keep on light squares. Try to get outside pass pawn, which is good almost in every end game you may play. Well, examples we should have on the rook endings, but we're going to discuss it later in the rook ending chapter. So outside pass pawn is very good. Active king is very essential, but these are not just the bishop versus bishop rules. The active king you must have in any and every end game you can have. That's why you say the end game. That means pieces are very few pieces, and then king is important piece to play because they reduces danger to the king. So, activity of the king, having your pawns on the opposite color of the bishop, trying to get outside pass pawn and having active king. Well, these are the basic principles of it. And a pass pawn, well, obviously, I don't need to tell you that having a pass pawn is very important, because having pass pawn is important in any ending, as long as you know that pawn can be promoted to the queen. So it's always a good thing to do. It's good actually in the middle game as well. So let's get some interesting position of the bishop endgame. Well, I'm going to give you interesting thing. Well, here is the bishop ending, where both sides have pawns. Okay, this is the position. Now, this is very interesting position, and it's winning for white. Now, I don't need to tell you that it's easily winning for white if it's black's move, because then black just simply has no move and white just wins. White just wins here easily. However, what happens if it's white's move? Now, white is winning here as well. Now, the way white should win, they have to triangulate. So they have to get the same position. This is very interesting to notice now. Same position with black to move. That's what we just had in the previous example. The only difference here is that should we triangulate on diagonal of f1, a6, or on diagonal b1 to h7? Let's try to triangulate on f1, a6. If we go bishop e2, he goes bishop d7. On bishop f1, he goes bishop c6. He is going to stay away from e8 square. But you can wait when white on bishop e8, bishop d7. And as soon as white goes bishop d3, black goes bishop e8. White cannot make a progress here. Now, let's try the other type. Why white cannot make a progress? Because black has two squares to maneuver on. They have d7 and c6 square for a bishop. So they can go from one square to the another and wait when white's bishop gets to d3 and then play bishop to e8. It's completely different thing if we can do bishop c2. On the other pawn, keep an eye on g6 pawn. Black must go bishop f7, and if we go now bishop b1, you see the great difference here. The difference is that black bishop does not have any other square on the f7 e8 diagonal. Now they must go back to e8, and then bishop to d3 gets us to the starting position with black to move, and black loses here. Of course, black should try bishop f7 after bishop c2, bishop f7, and bishop b1. If they try king e8, what is going to happen here? Now, if we go king c5, king e5, king takes b5, king f4, this may be a draw. However, that's not a draw, because after bishop b1, king e6, white goes now to the pawn ending, which is easily won. Bishop a2 check, king e7, bishop takes f7, king takes f7, and now king c5, and white is going to queen. White is way ahead of black, queening the b pawn. So those are the principles. That's why it's very important to keep your pawns on the colors opposite of your bishop color. Well, you see the pawns on g6 and g5, on b5 and b4, they are fixed pawns, frozen pawns. They belong to the category of frozen pawn structure because neither pawn can move on the both sides of the board. That's why it determines big advantage for white. Remember, once that happens, you know you have big advantage. Now, only thing you should know is you don't know whether its advantage is enough to win or not. Whether it's enough to win or is not enough to win, it all depends on some concrete positions. It's not, as I repeat again, it's not like in a pawn ending that every result can be predicted. Now, there are some rules in the end game, such as also one minor piece endings, such as bishop versus knight. Now, let's get one of the positions, bishop versus knight. So we have very simple position where bishop is versus knight. Well, even let's get this position. We have 3 pawns each. It looks like very easy position to play, and looks like should be easy draw. No, it's not. This position is a big advantage for white. And why? Because white has a bishop. Now, is bishop always better than knight in minor piece endings? Absolutely not. Bishop is better, as a general rule, the bishop is better than knight in cases where we have pawns on opposite sides of the board. On both sides of the board. We have pawns on a queen side and pawn on a king side. The reason why it's important, because bishop in those cases is better because it's a long-range piece. Bishop can be playing on the king side and the queen side simultaneously. Well, let's see the example. King c2, king c8, king d3, king d7, king, b6 probably, king e4, king d7, king f5, king e7, and king g5. Now, let's see why white is so much better. If black goes, well, here maybe black simply loses the pawn, but suppose white had the dark square bishop on f2. Then black goes king f7, king h6, and king g8. Now, this position is also difficult for black. White may go a4. Now, black has difficulties with those pawns, and maybe bishop e3. Now, white is looking at some point to jump with the king on the queen side, because king is paralyzed. Even if we stood in the middle of the board like this, you see, some position like this looks like easy draw, but it's not, because if white's king penetrates on one or the other side, and so is black king, black is going to be totally lost. Here, let me give you an example, good example. Well, suppose black's king is on h3 and white's king is on c6. This is the rough example. It's definitely lost for black. Even if it's black's move, king takes h7, so we can probably go king b7, and now white is going to get both of those pawns, and bishop will support taking these pawns and stop black's pawn. Knight, however, cannot support its pass pawn and at the same time hold on the other side the enemy pawns. So black, the bishop has big advantage when pawns are on opposite sides of the board, on both sides of the board. However, if we take the different story. If we get the position, for example, position where are 4 pawns versus 4 pawns. Well, let's get this position. Now, this is slightly better for black. Why is it better for black? Because knight versus bishop. Now knight is better because pawns only on one side of the board. Of course, you cannot win it if white plays correctly, but sometimes if we achieve position like this, when one side has a blockade, it can be won. Or, example, one side has an extra pawn. For example, the 4 pawns and a bishop versus 3 pawns and a knight. It will never be won. But if we have 4 pawns and the knight versus 3 pawns and the bishop, then it's a good winning chances. Because knight is a better piece on one side, where pawns we have only on one side. Because knight can access any square in that area. Bishop can only access half of the squares in this area. And there is no other area where bishop can be helpful. So knight is a lot better piece. So those are the basics of the minor endings. Minor endings were bishop versus knight.